In a land where the wind carries dust and silence speaks louder than words, a stranger arrived at a broken ranch, carrying wounds no one could see. She came to bake bread, that's all. Or at least, that's what she told herself. But behind those quiet mornings and warm loaves, something deeper was waiting. A grieving father, a silent child, and a home that had forgotten how to feel alive. The question is, can one broken woman bring life back to a place that has already given up on healing? If you believe in stories like this, leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you won't miss the next journey.
The stagecoach bucked to a stop, throwing Mary hard against the wooden seat. Dust billowed in, settling on her filthy dress. She had been traveling for 6 long days. "End of the line, ma'am," the driver's voice cut through the haze, full of the pity and suspicion she was used to. "Ashford Ranch. You sure this is the place?" Mary grabbed her beaten suitcase and the small wooden box she had guarded the whole trip. Inside, her sourdough starter was wrapped in damp cloth. It was the only thing besides her life she had managed to save. "I am sure," she lied. The ranch sprawled out before her like a dare. Old buildings sagged around a main house that had seen far better days. In the distance, cattle dotted hills that ran up to mountains sharp enough to cut the sky. The place did not look safe, but she needed distance more than safety. 3,000 miles would have to be enough. The driver dumped her trunk in the dirt and left in a cloud of dust. When the air cleared, a man stood 10 feet away. John Carter looked just as hard and weathered as his telegram sounded. The sun had carved lines into his face, and his hands were rough from years of work. He wore his grief like a heavy coat. "You are the cook," he said. It was not a question. "Baker?" Mary corrected, her voice steady. "Mary Whitaker. Does not matter what you call yourselves. You bake bread, you keep the kitchen clean, you stay out of my way. $50 a month, room and board. Those the only bags you got?" "Yes." He grunted, picking up her trunk like it weighed nothing, and walked toward the house. Mary followed, clutching her starter box, her city boots stumbling on the rough ground. She was not made for this place. The kitchen was worse than she could have imagined. A huge cast-iron stove was covered in grime. Dishes were piled high in a basin that smelled awful. The floor had not been swept in ages. Flour and sugar barrels were left open, and mouse droppings were scattered everywhere. "The last cook left 3 months ago," John said from the doorway. "Too quiet for her. Woman before that ran off with a salesman after 2 weeks. He paused. "Does not matter. Do your job or you will leave. I do not tolerate drama." Mary carefully set down her box. In her old life, she would have apologized, made herself smaller. "I will need supplies," she said instead. "Good flour, fresh yeast, salt, sugar, and clean containers. That stove needs to be stripped down and re-seasoned. I also need to know who I am cooking for. 3 of us, me, my foreman Jack, and my daughter. She does not eat much." A shadow passed over his face. "No preferences, just make bread and whatever else keeps us working. I will have Jack get you a supply list tomorrow." His voice turned to ice. "My daughter is none of your concern. You do not talk to her. You do not bother her. You leave her completely alone. That is not a suggestion." Before Mary could say a word, he was gone. She stood in the ruined kitchen, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. It took 6 hours just to make the kitchen functional. She had to make 4 trips outside for wood to heat water for cleaning. Some dishes had food stuck so hard she had to boil them for an hour just to scrub them. Her soft city hands blistered and bled, but she did not stop. The mice had ruined the flour, so she dumped the whole barrel outside. The sugar could be saved with some sifting. She found good quality pots and pans buried under all the chaos. Someone had cared for this kitchen once. By sundown, she had a clean space, organized supplies, and beans simmering on the stove. She had found onions and potatoes in a root cellar. She fed her starter, the precious thing that had traveled 3,000 miles. It bubbled with life, a survivor just like her. That is when she felt eyes on her. A little girl stood in the doorway. She was maybe 7 or 8 years old, with tangled dark hair and a dress that was too small. Her eyes are what stopped Mary cold. They were huge, dark, and completely silent. It was not shyness. It was the quiet of something that had been broken. "Hello," Mary said gently. "I am Mary, the new cook. Are you hungry?" The girl just stared, not even a blink. "Leave her alone." John's voice was sharp from behind the girl, making Mary jump. "Emma, go to your room." The little girl disappeared like a wisp of smoke. John stood in the doorway, his face like stone. "I told you to stay away from her. She came to the kitchen, I do not care. You do not talk to her. You do not look at her. You pretend she does not exist." He paused. "She does not speak. Has not said a word in 2 years. The doctors cannot figure it out. So do not bother trying to fix her. Just leave her be." Mary's throat tightened. She knew that kind of silence, the kind you learn when speaking only makes things worse. "I understand," she said quietly. "Do you?" he asked, and he really looked at her then. Something in his face changed. "Who gave you those bruises?" Her hand went to her wrist, where the marks were fading. She thought her sleeves had hidden them. "Someone who will not be a problem anymore." "Are you running from the law?" "No." "From a man?" She met his eyes directly. "From a monster. There is a difference." They stared at each other for a long moment. Then he gave one sharp nod. "Dinner is at 6, breakfast at 5. Lunch gets packed for me and Jack. You burn the bread, you are gone. You cause trouble, you are gone." He left. Mary stood in the clean kitchen listening to the beans bubble and tried not to think about the silent girl with too much sadness in her eyes. She woke at 4 in the morning, an old habit. Her small room was simple but clean. A quilt lay on the bed, hand-sewn with uneven stitches. It was probably made by Emma's mother, the dead wife whose absence was felt everywhere in this house. Mary dressed and went to the kitchen. Her starter was bubbly and fragrant. She fed it, then started the fire in the stove. Bread required patience. You could not rush it or force it to be something it was not. Making bread was honest work. You took flour, water, salt, and starter, and you kneaded until your arms burned. You let it rise on its own schedule. If you treated it right, you made something that quieted more than just a rumbling stomach. By 5:30, she had 4 loaves in the oven. Bacon was frying and strong coffee was brewing. When John came in at 5:45, a full plate was waiting for him. He just stared at it. She asked if anything was wrong. He slowly sat and said, "It has been a long time since somebody made me breakfast." He ate without a word and never looked up. When he was done, he brought his plate to the sink. "Bread is good," he said. "Jack comes for lunch at noon." He stopped at the door. "And Emma, leave a plate for her. She will eat when she is ready." He left Mary alone with the warm scent of baking and his heavy silence. Jack was nothing like his cousin. He was friendly and loud, thrilled that the kitchen no longer smelled of neglect. "You are a miracle worker," he said, taking more bread. "I have been eating beans for 3 months. This is civilization." He was a young man, about 30, with an easy grin. "My mother was Mexican," he said. "My father was Irish. John and I are family. When his wife Sarah died, Jack gestured at the whole ranch. He closed up, stopped talking. He just works until he falls down." "Emma stopped talking around that same time," Jack said. Mary asked what happened to Sarah while packing his lunch. "A fever 2 winters ago. It came on fast and took her even faster. The doctor could not do a thing. John has not been right since, and Emma just went silent." Jack told her a doctor in town said the girl would talk when she was ready, but it had been 2 years. John had given up. "He tells everybody not to talk to her. He does not want her getting attached to someone who will leave. The last cook tried to be her friend. When the woman left, Emma would not eat for 3 days. Jack's voice grew quiet. "So maybe John is right. maybe it is best to keep your distance." That evening, Mary left a plate of pot roast and fresh bread on the table. She saw the girl watching from the shadows of the hall. Their eyes met. Mary offered a small smile, then went back to her work. The next morning, the plate was empty. Her days fell into a rhythm. Rise at 4, feed the starter, the pig, bake bread, breakfast at 6. Then it was a cycle of cleaning and cooking until bedtime. Her hands toughened. The bread got better. John never said so, but he started taking extra for his lunch. Jack's praise never stopped, and Emma's plate was always clean by morning. On the 7th day, Mary made cinnamon rolls with dusty cinnamon she found and fresh butter from cream Jack had brought. She rolled the dough into spirals and let them rise until they were soft. The smell from the oven was good enough to bring tears to her eyes. As she pulled them out, she felt someone watching. Emma was in the doorway, drawn by the scent, with a hunger in her eyes that was not for food. Mary put icing on a warm roll and set it on the kitchen table. "They are better warm," she said gently, not looking at the girl. "But they will keep." She gave Emma space. She heard the chair scrape, then a long, quiet moment. Finally, a small voice whispered, "Thank you." Mary's hands stopped for a second, but she did not turn around. She just kept working, letting the girl feel safe. After a while, she heard the chair move again and the sound of small feet leaving. The plate was empty. She held back her own tears. Emma had spoken. Mary kept it a secret. Soon, Emma started visiting the kitchen more often, but never when John was there. She would sit quietly and watch Mary work. Sometimes she would help, fetching a spoon or holding a bowl. Mary would talk softly, explaining what she was doing. One afternoon, Mary showed Emma the starter. "It is alive," she said, pointing to the bubbles. "It is full of tiny workers that make the bread get big. This starter belonged to my grandmother. It is probably 100 years old." Emma's eyes grew wide. "When I feed it, I am feeding all those little creatures inside. The yeast gets to eating the sugar in the flour and lets out little gas bubbles. That's what makes bread light and fluffy instead of a hard, flat cracker." Emma scrunched up her nose, and Mary swore she saw the hint of a smile. 2 weeks later, Emma finally spoke. "Can I help you with that?" Without a second thought, Mary gave her a wooden spoon. "You stir this here while I get the salt." They worked side by side in a comfortable quiet. When John walked in for supper, he froze. He saw his little girl on a stool stirring batter while Mary watched over her. "She's just helping, John," Mary said, her eyes still on her work. "We're making cornbread." Mary felt the storm in him, fear and anger all mixed up. He was terrified of someone else leaving his girl, but Emma just kept at it, calm as could be. John gave a short nod and walked out. That evening, Emma ate at the table with them. John saw it, but kept quiet. Still, Mary noticed his hand tremble just a bit when he reached for the cornbread. 3 weeks later, trouble came looking for her. John had sent her to town for supplies, telling her to be back by 4. The store was busy. The owner was running ragged. As Mary waited, she heard a voice that sent a chill straight through her. "Well now, Mary Whitaker, you're a long way from Boston." She turned slow. There stood Reggie Patterson, about 3 feet off, smiling like a fox in a henhouse. He was one of Thomas's buddies. Not a close one, but he knew enough. "You've got the wrong woman," Mary said, keeping her voice even. "My name's Mary Whitaker." "Sure it is." He stepped in closer, and the smell of whiskey hit her. "Does your new boss know his cook is wanted by the law? Thomas is mighty worried. He's saying you took something important when you ran off." "I took nothing." "That ain't the story he's telling the law." Reggie's grin got wider. "There's a reward. $500 for anyone who knows where you are. That's a good chunk of change." The whole store went silent. Folks were all ears now. Her mind was spinning. $500 meant a telegram. It meant Thomas would come and ruin everything. "I'll give you $1,000, she said, her voice low, "to act like you never saw me." Reggie just laughed. You ain't got $1,000. Not yet, but I'll get it. Just give me 2 months. Why wait 2 months for a maybe when I can have 500 right now? Because when Thomas gets here and finds me, he's going to wonder who helped me vanish. She leaned in, speaking even quieter. You know he ain't a forgiven man, Reggie. You've seen him angry. You want him to find out you took hush money? A flicker of doubt crossed his face. He knew what Thomas could do. 2 months, Mary pushed. $1,000. You walk away, and we all win. He sized her up for a long moment. Finally, he said, 1 month, and don't you dare run. I'll find you. I'm done running. He left. Mary stood there. Mary stood, trembling, wondering how on earth she'd get that much money in 30 days. The answer came to her later that night. Bread. Not just for the family, but bread to sell. The town was booming with miners and railroad men. Folks needed good, fresh food. She could bake extra and sell it to the general store, the hotel, anybody. It meant harder work, but she'd faced worse. The next morning, she laid out her plan for John. He shut her down flat. No, just hear me out. I said no. You're paid to cook for us, not start a bakery in my kitchen. It won't get in the way of my chores. I'll just bake more in the mornings. The store owner promised to buy all I can make. I don't give a damn what he said. The answer's still no. What if I give you half the money for using your kitchen and flour? That made him pause. Why do you need cash that bad? She couldn't tell him the whole truth. Personal reasons. Not good enough. I owe money, she finally said, hating the lie. I've got to pay it back. Before the folks you're running from find you, John finished for her. His eyes were like daggers. I ain't a fool, Mary. You get here all bruised up with a new name. You're jumpy as a cat. Now you need a pile of money fast. What trouble are you bringing here? The kind that money can make disappear, or the kind that never stops following. They just stared at each other. Emma was upstairs, safe. It was just them and the unspoken truth between them. Just 1 month, Mary pleaded. Give me a month. If it causes one bit of trouble, I'll leave. I'm just asking for a chance. Something in her voice must have reached him. His hard face softened just a hair. Half the money, he said. And you don't slack on your chores. If this brings any trouble to my daughter, it won't. It damn well better not. So she started baking at 3 in the morning instead of 4. First it was 12 loaves to sell, then 18, then 24. The store sold out as fast as she could bake them. Her whole body ached. Her hands, barely healed, were cracked and sore again. She was lucky to get 4 hours of sleep. But the money started coming. $20 the first week, then 35, then 50. She hid the cash in her mattress. It was growing, but not near fast enough. Emma helped out when she could, measuring flour and watching the oven. The girl was talking more, asking quiet questions about this and that. Did you always want to be a baker? She asked one morning. No, Mary said. She wanted to say more, but just told her life had other plans. Do you miss your old home? No, I don't. Me neither, Emma whispered. I don't miss before. When Mama was here, it hurt too much to talk, so I stopped. Mary's hands stopped working the dough. What changed your mind? You did. Emma looked up at her, her eyes looking old for a child. You make it feel safe in here, like it's okay to make a sound again. Mary had to turn her back so the little girl wouldn't see the tears. 4 days before the deadline, she was still short $300. She had pushed herself past exhaustion. John found her barely standing at the stove. You're going to work yourself into the grave, he said straight out. I'm fine. No, you ain't. You can hardly stand up. When did you last get any real sleep? I don't know. Tuesday. Maybe. She tried to watch the bread, but her vision was blurry. He put a hand on her shoulder. Mary, stop. I can't. How much more do you need? She couldn't bring herself to say it. 300, she whispered. John was silent for a bit. Take it as a loan against what you'll make later. I can't do that. Yes, you can. Because if you fall apart, it'll break Emma's heart. And I can't. His voice hitched. I can't stand by and watch her lose somebody else. Mary really looked at him then. She saw the fear behind that tough exterior. She's talking again, you know, Mary said. She's healing. His hand stayed on her shoulder. He told her she couldn't run herself into the ground. Emma needed her, and the ranch needed her. He fronted her the money that very night, pulling cash from a hidden lockbox. He didn't ask a single question, just trusted her. The next morning, she gave Reggie the full $1,000. He called her a smart woman, saying her husband never knew what he had. She looked him square in the eye and told him Thomas never saw her as a person. She warned him that if he breathed a word, she would tell everyone he blackmailed a woman running from a monster. His smile died right there. He said she had changed. She just answered, I have. She walked back with nothing in her pockets but a whole lot of hope. As the seasons changed, her bread business boomed. She paid John back in 6 weeks. Emma started laughing again, and John started smiling. It finally felt like a home. But trouble was on the horizon. A powerful land baron wanted the ranch, and her ex, Thomas, was on a train heading straight for her. The real fight was about to begin, but this time, Mary was ready. Trouble rode in late that August. A man in a suit too fancy for a cattle ranch appeared. Mary was in the kitchen and heard the slow, deliberate sound of his horse. She looked out the window and saw a silver-haired man get down like he owned the whole place. He had 2 hard-faced fellas with him. John came out from the barn, his shoulders stiff with tension. The man, a Mr. Thornton, started talking about the future of the valley. John told him his future was just fine. Thornton gave a cold laugh and said a railroad was coming through. He explained that all the smart ranchers were selling their land to him. He said the stubborn ones always ended up regretting their choice. John refused, saying the ranch was family land. Thornton's tone turned sharp. He pointed out the ranch was barely holding on. Then he played his ace. He claimed the creek running through the property, their main source of water, actually belonged to the county. John knew it was a lie, but Thornton just shrugged. He said proving it in court would take lawyers and money, things John didn't have. Then he made his offer, $15,000, enough to start fresh. But this here is my home. This is our dirt, our memories. Thornton's voice got low. I'm being neighborly because I respect your family name. But that well is about to run dry. You have till the end of September. After that, things get complicated. Is that a threat? It is a deadline. Thornton swung up on his horse. Think about your little girl, John. A failing ranch ain't no place to raise a child. They rode off in a swirl of dust. John just stood there, his hands clenched into fists. Mary came out onto the porch. Did you hear all that? He asked, not looking at her. I heard enough. Is he right about the water? I don't know. My daddy handled all that business. The papers are buried under 20 years of dust. He finally turned to her. $15,000 is a joke. This spread is worth 3 times that. He is trying to rustle my land with paperwork. Can you fight him? With what? I have maybe $2,000 in the bank. A lawyer would burn through that before breakfast. Besides, Thornton owns the judge and half the county. Emma came outside then, staying close to Mary. John's face softened for a second, then went hard again. Go on inside, sweetheart. Everything is fine. Daddy, are we going to lose our home? The question hit him like a fist. No, we are not. But his voice was thin, and they all heard it. That night, Mary found him in the office, drowning in old ledgers with a whiskey bottle close by. The answer is not at the bottom of that bottle, she said. Maybe not, but I have to do something, he said, rubbing his eyes. My family bled for this land. They fought to keep it. My father broke his back on it. I will not be the one to let it go because I cannot afford a lawyer. Mary walked in, moved the whiskey away, and sat down. Tell me about the water rights. Just what Thornton said. Some county filing from 1867 supposedly gives them control. That means I would need a permit, which he could block. No water, no cattle, no cattle, no ranch. Do you have the original land grant? Why? If your great-grandfather was granted this land before 1867, his rights came first. That is old territorial law. She paused. My father was a clerk at the land office. I learned a few things. John just stared. You never said anything. You never asked about my life before now. I know things, John. I am more than just the cook who showed up with bruises. For the first time since Thornton left, a flicker of hope crossed his face. If I find that grant, can you make heads or tails of it? I can sure try. They worked until 2 in the morning, digging through boxes that had not seen daylight in decades. They found birth certificates, old bills for dead cattle, and faded photographs. Then at the very bottom of a trunk that smelled of mildew, they found it, the land grant, dated April 1851. It gave his family 640 acres and all water sources, forever. Mary read it 3 times. This is ironclad, she said. It predates any county filing. Thornton is running a bluff. Or he was hoping I did not have the proof. Well, she said, handing him the old paper. Now you do. You have to get this recorded at the county office. Make it public record. John held the document like it was made of pure gold. How did you know what to look for? Because men like Thornton always play the same game. They find folks who are hurting and use complicated words to make simple theft sound legal. Her voice had turned to ice. I have seen it before. He studied her face in the dim light. What happened to you back east? Nothing I want to talk about tonight, she said, standing up. Get some sleep. Tomorrow you ride to town. Mary. His hand gently caught her wrist. Thank you. She looked down at his calloused hand on her skin. You gave me a chance when I needed one. I'm just returning the favor. But they both knew it was more than that now. The next morning, John rode for town with the land grant. Mary went about her day, baking bread and cleaning, but her mind was racing. Thornton would not stop with the water rights. A man like that never quits. He just finds another weak spot and pushes until something breaks. Emma was quiet in the kitchen. Are you scared? She asked all of a sudden. Of what, honey? Of Mr. Thornton. Of us having to leave. Mary knelt down to look her in the eye. I am not going anywhere, and neither are you. Your father is going to fight this, and we are going to help him. How? That is a good question, Mary admitted. But we will figure it out. Emma bit her lip. Mama always said that when things got hard, you had to be harder. Your ma was a sharp lady. I surely miss her, Emma said, her voice barely a whisper. But I'm glad you're here. Is that wrong? No, darling, not wrong at all. Mary pulled her in close, the girl's small shoulders trembling. You can miss her and still let new folks in. That ain't betrayal. That's just living. They stood there a good while before getting back to the dough that needed punching down. John came back that afternoon with a heavy heart. The grant's filed, he said, dropping into a chair, looking plumb wore out. County clerk made it official. Water rights are ours. That's real good, Mary said. So what's the trouble? Thornton was there. He watched me file, smirking like he knew a secret. Then on my way out, one of his boys told me Thornton wants to meet tomorrow at the Riverside Hotel. That smells like a setup. Maybe, but I've got to go. Then we all go, Mary stated plain. You, me, and Jack. Strength in numbers. I'm not pulling y'all into my mess. You're not pulling me anywhere. I'm walking in with my eyes wide open. I know men like him, John. I know how they think. Going alone is just asking for trouble. Jack, leaning in the doorway, gave a nod. She's right. Thornton's the kind to fix the story to suit him. John looked at them, then at Emma's worried face in the corner. Fine, he sighed. But Emma stays here with Mrs. Chen. Mrs. Chen was Jack's sister, on a little farm about 3 miles east. Emma didn't say a word, and that told Mary just how scared she really was. The next day, they left Emma and rode out. The Riverside Hotel was the grandest place for 50 miles, 2 stories painted clean white. Thornton held court in the dining room, finishing up a high-dollar lunch. He motioned them over like he owned the place. "Mr. Ashford, and you brought company. How neighborly." His gaze fell on Mary. "I don't believe we've met." "Mary Whitaker. I work out at the ranch." "Ah, the baker. The whole town's been talking about your bread." His smile was all show. "Mighty enterprising of you, using another man's property." "I pay Mr. Ashford for use of his kitchen," she replied coolly. "It's an honest arrangement, I'm sure it is." Thornton looked back at John. "So you filed your land grant. Just making sure what's mine stays mine." "Is that so? Funny. For a man so sure of his claim, you look mighty troubled." Thornton leaned back. "See, old land grants are fine for history, but they don't say much about current debts." "I don't have any debts." "Well now, the First National Bank seems to think otherwise. Appears your father took out a loan back in 1882, $2,500 at 6% interest compounded every year. Never paid." Mary's blood ran cold. 44 years of interest on that kind of money would be a fortune. "That loan was paid off," John said, but his voice wavered. "You got the papers to prove it?" There was only silence. "I didn't think so." Thornton slid a document across the table. "The bank president is a good friend. He found this note signed by Colin Ashford, August 1882. No record of payment anywhere. The total amount owed now with interest," he let the words hang, "is $41,673. That number sat in the air, heavy as a tombstone." "That's not possible," Jack muttered. "Your pa would have said something." "Would he, or did he just forget?" Thornton sounded almost kindly. "Things get lost, people forget. But a debt is a debt." John's face was pale as a ghost. "I can't pay that." "I know. That's why I'm prepared to make you a fair offer. Sell me the ranch for $20,000. I pay the bank, and you walk away with cash in your pocket." "Except he loses his home for half its worth," Mary cut in. Thornton's eyes went hard. "Miss Whitaker, this is a private matter. It stopped being private when you used crooked bank records to try and steal this man's land. Be careful with words like that. They can get a person in trouble. So can fraud." The room got colder. "You're new here, Miss Whitaker. Let me explain something. This valley has rules. Folks who follow them do well. Folks who don't, well, they find reasons to leave." Jack's hand drifted toward his gun. "We need time," John said, his voice tight, "to check this. You have until September 30th. That's when the bank forecloses." Thornton stood and straightened his coat. "Of course, sell to me before then, and this whole mess just disappears. Think on it, Mr. Ashford. Think about what's best for your little girl." He left them sitting in a stunned silence. "That note could be a fake," Jack said. "We need a lawyer." "With what money?" John's voice was hollow. "And what if it is? Proving it would cost me everything I have. He's got me cornered." Mary stared at the paper Thornton left. The signature looked right, the seal looked official, but something was off. The paper felt too new for a 44-year-old document. The ink was too sharp. "Can I hold on to this?" she asked. John just nodded. "I want to check something." Later that night, with John in his office and Emma asleep, Mary sat with the note under the lamplight. She'd learned about forgeries the hard way, thanks to her ex-husband. She knew what to look for: the unnatural smoothness of a traced signature, paper that was wrong for the time, ink that hadn't aged. This note had it all. It was a fine piece of work, but it was a fake. The trick was how to prove it. She was deep in thought when Jack appeared at the door, his face grim. "We got trouble. Lost 6 head of cattle. Found them at the bottom of Miller's Canyon, legs broken. Somebody ran them off that cliff on purpose." Thornton We can't prove it, but it's his style. Push and push until a man breaks. Jack slumped into a chair. John's talking about taking the deal. Says it's better than nothing. We're not losing a thing. Mary, I like your spirit, but that promissory note is a forgery. I'm dead sure of it. Jack looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Can you prove it? I think so, but even then we need more than proof. We need something to make Thornton back down for good. They started talking and they didn't stop until the sun came up. It was a wild plan, but it was all they had. Mary needed to make her small bread business famous, and she needed to do it yesterday. She rode into town and went straight to Mrs. Patterson's general store with a bold proposition. Turn the Harvest Festival into a big-money bread contest to draw crowds and press from out of town. Mrs. Patterson was not convinced. Why? Mary laid it out plain. Because Thornton's running the Ashfords off their land. After them, he will come for the rest of us. The contest would shine a bright light on the town, making it harder for him to work in the shadows. And you are sure you can win? The store owner asked. Mary just smiled. I know my way around an oven. For 2 weeks, she worked harder than she ever had. The festival was set for September 28th, with a prize of $500. It would not save the ranch outright, but it would sure draw a crowd. John watched her, a mix of hope and disbelief on his face. You really reckon this will work? It is better than giving up, she said. You could have just left, he pointed out. I could have, she agreed, meeting his gaze. But I am tired of running. This ranch and Emma, y'all gave me a reason to stand and fight. Something in him softened. He reached for her hand and she did not pull away. After all this, he said softly, we should talk. After, she promised. The night before the big day, Emma was too scared to sleep. What if they do not like your bread? She whispered in the dark kitchen. What if Mr. Thornton wins? Mary pulled her close. We might lose this fight, Emma, but that does not mean we should not try. Sometimes trying is the whole point. Emma rested her head on Mary's shoulder. I am glad you came here. Me too, sweetheart, Mary said, her throat tight. The festival morning was clear and quiet. Mary had been up since 2, preparing the bread that would either save them or be their last stand. She was making her very best. She baked 4 perfect kinds of bread, pouring her whole heart into each loaf. Emma helped with quiet focus while the boys readied the wagon. By dawn, they were off. The town was already humming with folks from 50 miles around, all here for the big festival. In the middle of it all was the bread contest. Thornton watched from his hotel balcony, his face a blank slate. Mary set up her table, arranging the loaves just so. The other bakers were good, solid competition. The judges, the mayor, and a food critic started tasting at noon. When they got to her table, their expressions lit up. It was that good. But then Thornton came down and whispered something to the judges. The mayor's face tightened. At 2 o'clock, he stood up, avoiding Mary's eyes. With a weak smile from Thornton, Mary knew. The winner was Mrs. Helen Green. As the crowd clapped, $500 and her last hope vanished. Emma squeezed her hand while John and Jack looked like they were ready to start a war. But then the critic from Sacramento stepped up. Excuse me, he said to the crowd. While all the bread was fine, Miss Whitaker's sourdough was the best I have tasted west of the Mississippi. It was pure art. The mayor stammered. But we have a winner. The critic looked straight at Mary. I'm offering a different prize. I write for a big newspaper, and I'd like to feature your work. I also know restaurant owners who need bread like yours. The crowd buzzed. This was better than money. It was a real future. I'm interested, Mary said, her voice clear. Thornton's smile was long gone. On the ride home, John finally spoke. That critic showing up was pure luck. Maybe, Mary replied. Or maybe good bread just finds good people. But it doesn't fix our problem with the bank. She pulled out the promissory note. I've been studying this. It's a fake. The trick is proving Thornton is behind it. They rode on in the sunset, the ranch ahead of them, a home worth fighting for. Whatever was coming, she wasn't alone. The answer came to her in the dead of night, jolting her awake. She sat up, her heart racing as she recalled Thornton's words. The bank president was a friend who checked old records. If the note was fake, those records wouldn't exist. She dressed quietly and went to the cold kitchen. She lit a lamp, her mind made up. Breaking into a bank was crazy. She could go to jail, or worse, disappear if Thornton caught her. But doing nothing while John lost his home was not an option. "Can't sleep?" John was standing in the doorway, startling her. "You scared me," she said. He sat down across from her. "What's on your mind?" She should have lied, but the truth came out instead. "I'm thinking about breaking into the bank." John just stared. "The note is a forgery. If the loan paperwork isn't in the bank's archives, that proves Thornton made it all up." "And you're going to find out by committing a felony?" he asked. "Even if you got in, you can't use stolen evidence in court." "I don't need it for court," she said. "I need it for leverage against Thornton. Proof of his fraud could ruin him." "Or it could get you killed," John shot back. "You think he won't get rid of someone who threatens him?" "He might," Mary admitted quietly. "But I'm tired of letting men like him win." John looked at her hard in the lamplight. "This is about more than the ranch, isn't it?" "It always is," she said, meeting his gaze. "I was married for 3 years to a man who controlled every breath I took. When I finally ran, he hunted me. Thornton's just playing the same game with different rules. I swore I'd never be powerless again." "So, you want revenge?" he asked. "No, I refuse to be a victim." She leaned in. "I'm doing this, John, with or without you." He was quiet for a long moment, then let out a heavy sigh. "You are absolutely insane." "I've been called worse," she said. "Fine," he said, standing up. "But we do this smart. We plan. We don't get caught. We don't get—" And he returned with paper and a pencil. "Tell me everything you know about bank security." They worked through the night, planning the most foolish and necessary thing either of them had ever done. To get inside the bank, they needed keys. That meant bribing the janitor, Jack's cousin. "How much money do we have?" Mary asked. $1,800, John replied. "Offer him $200 for 1 hour with the keys," she decided. "That is 6 months' wages, a risk he might just take." When they told Jack, he thought they were insane. "You want to rob the bank?" "Not rob it," John corrected, laying out the plan. Jack was against it. "Miguel has 6 kids. He cannot lose that job." $200 will cushion that blow," Mary said calmly. She reminded him the building was empty all night. Finally, Jack looked at the ranch they were fighting for and gave a grim nod. "I will talk to him. But you, Mary, are staying here." "The hell I am," she said. "My husband taught me everything about hiding money in ledgers. I know what to look for. You need me in there." John backed her up. "She is right, Jack. Let us get moving." Jack returned at 4. Miguel was in. "He thinks we are nuts," Jack said. "But his youngest needs an operation the family cannot afford." $200 was enough to convince him. He would leave the keys under the back step at 6:30 and wanted them back by 7:30 sharp. That gave them 1 hour. The rest of the day was a blur of anxiety. Even Emma knew something was wrong. "You are worried," she said while they were making dough. "About a lot of things," Mary admitted, trying to keep her hands from shaking. "Emma, if I have to go away for a bit, it is not because I want to." The little girl's eyes went wide. "You are scaring me." "I am sorry," Mary said, pulling her into a flowery hug. "Sometimes grown-ups have to do hard things. Just trust me." Dinner was silent and tense. At 6:15, with Emma tucked in bed, they got ready. Dressed in dark clothes with a single shielded lantern, they looked every bit the criminals they were about to become. "You sure about this?" John asked, his hand on the door. Thinking of all she had endured, Mary just shook her head. "I am not backing out." They rode toward town as the sun bled out across the sky. The keys were right where they were supposed to be. They slipped into the back of the bank, quiet as shadows. Inside the dark office, John lit a lantern, and they started hunting through the old files. They were looking for the year 1882. "What are we after?" John whispered. "Proof," she said, her hands flying through old paper. "Anything that shows your father's loan was real, or anything that looks too new to be true." The minutes dragged on, and her hope began to wear thin. Then John whispered her name. "Mary, look here, look." He held out a folder. Inside, beneath all the proper records, was the loan note from 1882 for $2,500. It was the original, yellowed with age. Stamped right across it in bold red ink were two words: "Paid in full," dated 1891. "He lied," John said, his voice tight. "This debt was settled 35 years ago. Thornton had faked the whole thing, counting on them never finding this. If we take this to the judge, we get arrested for breaking in," John realized. "Then we do not take it," Mary said, pulling out a small camera. "We take a picture of it." She quickly photographed the note and the other papers. Just as they were putting things back, they heard a key turn in the front lock. John killed the lantern, plunging them into darkness. Someone was inside the bank, and their slow, steady footsteps were getting closer. John pulled her toward the back door, but it had locked behind them. They were trapped. As the footsteps reached the office, Mary shoved him into a small supply closet. The door swung open, and lamplight flooded the room. It was Thornton. He went straight to the files, but then he paused. He knew something was wrong. He scanned the room, his eyes settling on the closet. "I know you are in here," he said calmly. "The lamp is still warm. Why don't you come on out?" When they did not move, he pulled out a gun. "I will count to 3. 1. John gripped her hand, ready to give himself up. 2. But before Thornton could finish, Mary stepped out into the light. His smile was as cold as a winter morning. "Well now, Miss Whitaker. And Mr. Ashford, I suppose you are in there as well." John emerged, his face like stone. "We know the note was paid off in 1891. This is fraud." Thornton just laughed. "And how will you prove it? You broke in here. Anything you found is useless." He gestured with the gun. "Now, we can make a deal. You sign over the ranch, and I forget this ever happened. Or you both go to prison." He held out a paper, all ready for a signature. "John was losing the land anyway," Thornton said softly. "This way he just stays out of a jail cell." John looked like he was about to give in, to sacrifice it all. "No," Mary said, stepping forward. "There is another option. You call the sheriff, and we tell him everything. I bet this is not the first time you have faked a debt to steal a man's land. Once the law starts digging, your whole empire will fall apart." He scoffed. "They will believe me over a pair of criminals." "Maybe," she answered. "But I reckon the big city newspapers will love a story about a powerful man who is nothing but a common thief. Crushin' honest folk sells papers." Her voice was pure steel. "You shoot us, you face a hangman. You arrest us, we'll talk to every newspaper from here to California. Either way, you're ruined." For the first time, Thornton looked uncertain. "You're bluffing. Try me. I've lost it all once before. It don't scare me. But you," she gave him a cold smile, "you've got everything to lose. Your money, your power, it is all built on lies." The quiet stretched out. His gun hand dipped. Just then the back door flew open. Jack stormed in with a rifle, Miguel and 3 others right behind him. "Drop it, Thornton." Jack's voice was like cold iron. "I swear I will put you down right where you stand." Thornton saw the rifles and knew the game was up. He slowly put his gun on the desk. "This ain't over," he snarled. "Oh, yes," Jack said. "It is. Miguel, you get that?" Miguel held up a notepad. Every word. He even admitted to the fraud. Thornton's face went pale as a sheet. "You set me up." "We just planned for a man like you," Mary said. "You are predictable." John stepped up and took the gun. "Here is what is going to happen. You will drop your claim on our ranch. You will tell the bank that note was a mistake, and you will leave my family be." "Or what?" "Or Miguel's testimony and my pictures of the paid note go to every paper west of the Mississippi. Your call." Thornton stood there, trapped by his own pride. He knew he'd lost. "Fine," he finally said, "but I have ways of making problems disappear." "So do I," Mary said softly. "And I have seen worse than you." They left him in his office, beaten but still a snake in the grass. Jack's men saw them out safely. On the ride back, John was quiet. "You planned all that," he finally said. "The witnesses and all." "I told you I learned from my past," Mary told him. "Men like Thornton always figure a woman is too scared or simple to outthink them. It is their greatest weakness. Remind me to never figure you for simple." She smiled, though her heart was still pounding. "I will try." But as they rode toward home, she felt his last words were a promise. The ranch house appeared, a single light burning in the kitchen window. Emma had waited up. When they came in, she threw her arms around John. "You are all right, both of you." "We are fine, darling," he said, holding her close. "It is all gonna be fine." But late that night, Mary sat in the quiet kitchen, the trembling finally hitting her. They had won, but Thornton was not the type to quit. She was trying to calm herself when she heard a horse coming fast. Her stomach went cold. It was well past midnight, and nobody rode that late unless trouble was on their heels. John heard it too, appearing with his rifle. Jack came from the bunkhouse. They met at the door. The rider pulled up in a swirl of dust. In the lamplight, Mary saw a woman she did not know, her face full of panic. "Mrs. Chen sent me," she gasped. "There is a man at her place. He's asking about a woman named Mary Whitaker." The woman's scared eyes found Mary. "He says he is her husband. He says he has come to take her." The world tilted. Thomas was here. John's hand squeezed hers, strong and steady. "Mrs. Chen sent a warning. A man showed up an hour ago asking for her. He was still out there, watching." She said to tell Mary the monster had found her. Mary's throat closed. After everything she had fought for, her past had finally cornered her. Thomas would not leave empty-handed. "Get inside." John's voice was deadly quiet. "Jack, get the men up. We need to secure the perimeter. You do not understand." "I understand perfectly." He turned to her, his eyes fierce. "You think I'm just going to hand you over to some coward from your past?" He held her face. "You are not going anywhere. We will handle this." Emma appeared, woken by the noise. Mary could not breathe, trapped again in that prison of a house, hearing his steps. John's voice cut through the panic. "Look at me. You are not alone this time." She focused on the promise in his eyes. "I am not alone," she whispered. The night outside was quiet, but inside Mary was done running. This time she would fight back. Emma's small hand slipped into hers. "Who is coming?" she whispered. Mary knelt, her voice trembling. "Someone from my old life. The monster I ran from." The child's question steadied her. She was not the same woman who fled Boston 4 months ago. She had built something here and would be damned if Thomas destroyed it. "Yes, but he is just a man, Emma. And we can stop him." John was already barking orders. "Miguel, women to the cellar. Jack, watch the north. I have got the barn." "No." Mary stood, her voice surprisingly firm. "I am not hiding. That is what he wants. For me to be scared. Mary, now is not the time. It is exactly the time." She grabbed the biggest kitchen knife. He came 3,000 miles because he is obsessed. Hiding just drags this out. John's jaw clenched. Then what do you suggest? I talk to him, out in the open. I tell him it is over, and if he does not leave, I will press charges. She gripped the knife tighter. He is a coward who only feels powerful in private. Take that away, and he has got nothing. Or he shoots you, Jack said flatly. Rich men get away with that all the time. He was not wrong. Then we get too many witnesses for him to handle, she said, and we have got leverage he does not know about. She turned to the messenger. Ride back to Mrs. Chen's. Tell her to gather the neighbors from 5 miles around. Tell them a man is threatening a woman, and we need everyone watching. The woman nodded and was gone in a cloud of dust. John stared at her, amazed. You have thought this through? For 4 months straight. She looked him in the eye. Promise me something. If he takes me, that is not happening. Promise me, she insisted. You will take care of Emma, and you will keep this ranch, Mary. Promise me, John. His hands gently held her face. I promise, but you are not leaving. We end this tonight. She prayed he was right. She had underestimated Thomas before, and it almost killed her. The next hour was a flurry of activity. Men with rifles took positions. Lanterns turned the yard bright as day. A protesting Emma was sent to safety with Miguel. Mary just watched from the kitchen, trying to steady her nerves for the moment he would finally appear. Mrs. Chen arrived with what looked like half the valley, at least 30 armed neighbors with grim faces. That man ain't right in the head, she told Mary inside. Talked about you like property. We are not letting him take you. This valley protects its own. Tears filled Mary's eyes. These people barely knew her, yet they came. Around 2 in the morning, a rider appeared. Thomas. He came alone, which was a surprise, riding in slow and deliberate. Mary recognized his posture, and old fear tightened her stomach. John stood beside her. We can still end this another way. No, he will not go without a confrontation. They walked out into the lamplight. Thomas dismounted, his gaze full of contempt for the crowd. When his eyes found Mary, they burned with rage and triumph. Mary, he said, his voice smooth and sharp. I have been looking for you. My name is Mary. You should not have bothered. His laugh was cold. Playing house with these farmers does not change who you are. You are my wife, and you belong with me. I was your wife, she corrected, and I have never belonged to anyone. The law says otherwise. You are coming home. Home. He took a step, and John stood like a wall between them. The lady says she is staying. That means you are leaving. Thomas looked John over with pure contempt. And who are you supposed to be? The man who's fixing to shoot you if you take another step. How very Texan, Thomas sneered, threatening a man instead of respecting the law. He pulled a paper from his coat. This is a court order from Boston. It gives me custody of my wife. She is to be seen by a doctor. Says here she is unstable, prone to wild notions and fits. This is a medical issue. The words hit Mary like a fist. He had done it. He had paid a judge to say she was crazy, just to drag her back. That is a lie, she said, her voice shaking with fury. I am not unstable. You beat me, and when I ran, you invented this story. You see, Thomas said to the folks gathered around, she is paranoid. I never touched her. Ask anyone back in Boston. I am a respected man. Why would I hurt my own wife? Because men like you always look respectable, Mary fired back. That is how you get away with it. Those are awful big claims. You got any proof? Any witnesses to these beatings? He spread his hands wide. No, because they never happened. The crowd was looking unsure. Thomas was good at twisting things. Then Mrs. Chen stepped forward. I have seen the scars. Thomas's smile vanished. When Mary first got here, she had bruises on her arms shaped like fingers. She had marks on her throat, and burns on her back, she said, were from a hot stove. Mrs. Chen's voice was steady as a rock. Those are not the marks of a delusional woman. Those are a survivor's marks. Thomas argued she could have faked them for pity. Just then, Dr. Harrison stepped forward from the crowd. He confirmed he had treated one of Miss Whitaker's old wounds 2 months ago. The scars told a clear story of being hurt for a very long time. Thomas called it nonsense, waving a paper from a court 3,000 miles away. John cut in, saying money could not buy the truth. Thomas demanded to know John's interest in the matter. "John Carter," he said plainly. "My interest is that Mary works for me and lives on my land, and I protect my own people." Thomas gave a mean laugh. "You have known her a few months and call her your own? I was her husband for 3 years. I know she is a liar who will trade favors for a safe place to sleep." A heavy silence fell. Then the sharp crack of John's fist hitting Thomas's jaw echoed. Thomas went down hard, blood coming from his lip. As he reached inside his coat for a weapon, Mary moved faster than thought. A kitchen knife was suddenly at his throat. "Do not," she said in a low voice, "do not make me do what we will both regret." Thomas froze, his eyes full of shock. He had never seen her fight back. "I will tell you what changed," Mary said, her voice strong. "I stopped believing your lies about me. I learned I never deserved your cruelty. And I built a life here where people actually care about me. You are nothing to me now." She pressed the blade just enough to draw a single drop of blood. "I bake bread that people enjoy. I look after a child who trusts me. I have survived everything this place has thrown at me. All you have done is chase a woman who does not want you." His face filled with rage. "You think these folks will protect the real you?" "They already know the real me," she answered. "They know I was broken and running from a monster, and they helped me anyway. That is the difference out here. People judge you by your actions, not by your wallet." She stood up and moved to John's side. Thomas got to his feet, wiping his bleeding mouth. He threatened to file charges and ruin every last one of them. "You will not," Jack said, stepping up with his camera. "I took a photograph of you reaching for a gun while threatening a woman. That is attempted murder, my friend. Unlike your paper, this picture shows the truth." Thomas's face lost all its color. Jack smiled a cold smile. "Go on back to Boston and try it. This picture and 30 witnesses will go to every newspaper in California." Thomas looked at the hard faces in the crowd and saw true fear for the first time. "You cannot keep her forever," he spat. "You will be waiting a mighty long time," John replied. "She is not going anywhere, and if you come back, we will not be so civilized." Thomas mounted his horse, stiff with shame. He gave Mary one last look. "I loved you." "No," she said quietly. "You loved owning me. That is different." Then he was gone, and she stood there shaking. The crowd started to head home, offering her quiet words of support. Soon it was only Mary and John in the lamplight, both of them feeling tired down to their bones. "You held a knife to his throat," John said, his voice soft. "I did. It was the most terrifying and beautiful thing I've ever seen." She let out a shaky laugh. "I thought I was going to be sick the whole time. You hid it well." He pulled her into a hug, and she sagged against him. He smelled of leather and wood smoke and safety. He warned that men like Thomas do not give up. She answered that women like her do not either. He told her she was magnificent. "I was scared to death," she confessed. He said that is sometimes the same thing. She wanted to kiss him to let all the fear and relief spill out. But life does not wait. Emma would be home soon, and there was bread to bake for the morning. "We should get some sleep," she said. He agreed, but they did not move. "When we get through all this," he said, "we are going to talk about what is next for us." She looked at him and whispered, "Yes, I really want that." The next day, a letter arrived saying Thornton had dropped his claim on the ranch. John read it 3 times in disbelief. "We won," he said. "We survived," Mary corrected. For a little while, surviving felt like winning. The good feeling did not last. A food critic in Sacramento had written a wonderful article about her bread. The telegram started coming that afternoon. A man in San Francisco wanted 200 loaves a week. By evening, 7 different businesses wanted to buy her bread. The money was staggering, more than the entire ranch made. "You have to do this," John told her, looking at the offers on the table. She worried she could not bake so much bread and still do her work on the ranch. He told her to hire some help and turn it into a real business. "This is your chance, Mary. Do not let fear stop you." "I am not afraid of change," she said. "I am afraid of losing this." She waved her hand at the kitchen and the ranch outside. "What if I build something that takes me away from you and Emma?" He took her hands in his. "What if you build something that gives all of us a better future?" "I am not asking you to choose. I am saying maybe you can have both." She wanted so badly to believe he was right, that she could grow her small business into something wonderful. 3 days later, a fever took hold of Emma. The doctor called it pneumonia and said she needed a real hospital in Sacramento. The treatment would cost $500, money they just did not have. Mary, thinking fast, wired her business contacts for advance payments on her bread. By midday, they had $800. They left right away, with Mary holding the burning hot little girl and whispering that everything would be all right. At the hospital, there was nothing to do but wait in the hall, both of them sick with worry. John finally asked when she started to love Emma. Mary said the girl was the daughter she never knew she needed. Then he asked about himself. She told him he was the reason she stopped running. They kissed, a desperate and real kiss, right before a nurse said Emma's fever broke. In the room, Emma whispered that her mama had visited her in a dream and said it was okay. Emma told them her mama wanted her to be happy, and for them to take care of her together. After 3 days, they took Emma home to a huge welcome party the neighbors had thrown. That night, John sat with Mary on the porch and asked her to marry him. Not for convenience, but for love. She said yes with tears in her eyes. A month later, they were married in a ceremony full of joy with Emma as the flower girl. Mrs. Chen had sewn her a beautiful dress. Jack stood by John's side as his best man. The whole valley came to celebrate, eating fresh bread Mary baked herself. John had grumbled about it, but she just smiled. "I'm a baker getting married, Jim," she told him, not the other way around. Her business boomed. Soon she hired help and turned the old barn into a real bakery. Her bread was famous all over California. The ranch was finally making good money. Thornton, his schemes all busted, cleared out of the valley for good. Thomas never showed his face again, and word was he'd already married some other poor soul. Emma grew up strong and fearless, learning to ride and bake and speak her mind. She called Mary Mama like it was the most natural thing in the world. Mary Whitaker had finally built a life she could be proud of, a life where she didn't have to be afraid. She'd found her place. Then, 18 months later, on a Wednesday morning, she smelled smoke. It was the wrong kind of smoke. She ran toward the barn, her heart sinking. The whole east wall was on fire. The flames shot up the old wooden beams, eating everything. Her assistants were outside, scared but safe. "How?" Mary cried, watching her dream turn to ash. The youngest girl, Maria, coughed and said, "It just went up, like someone threw kerosene on it." John showed up with buckets, getting a water line going from the well. Jack and the hands helped, but it was no use. The bakery was lost. All they could do was save the house. Mary stood there, a cold anger building inside her. This was no accident. Somebody had done this to her. By noon, only a black skeleton of the barn remained. Her ovens, her supplies, even her grandmother's sourdough starter that had traveled 3,000 miles, all gone. Emma found her sitting in the rubble, her face stained with soot. The girl's voice was just a whisper. "Is it all gone, Mama?" Mary looked at the mess. "The building is. The business. I don't know." Emma asked, "Was it them? The bad men?" "Maybe," Mary said, but she knew it was you. John walked over, his face hard. He held a burnt piece of paper. It said, "Whores and thieves get what they deserve." The words felt like a punch to the gut. This wasn't Thomas's fancy handwriting or Thornton's sharp letters. This was someone else, a coward hiding in the shadows. "I'm getting the sheriff," John said. Mary shook her head. "Don't. We have no proof. Whoever did this wants me to run. I'm not running. Mary, it's all gone, John said gently. I still have my hands. I still have my recipes. She looked at the house. I started in your kitchen with nothing. I can do it again. It's not the same. You have deadlines now, hundreds of loaves to bake. Then I'll just work harder, she snapped. I didn't get through all that just to be beat by some snake with a match. Emma watched her eyes full of fight. Mary knelt and hugged her tight. Sometimes folks try to tear down what they don't understand, she said softly. We don't let them win. We fight back. That night they sat at the kitchen table making lists. 800 loaves a week were due. The house kitchen could barely make 100. You need a new building, Jack said. A stone one. With what money? John asked, pointing at the numbers in his ledger. The ranch was doing better, but not that much better. So we borrow, Mary said. Not from a bank, from our clients. She grabbed the contracts. We tell them what happened. They can cancel, or they can invest in us. We'll promise them the same price on bread for 5 years. John looked at her stunned. That's a heck of a gamble. What have I got to lose? She shot back. Right now, I have nothing. She started writing the messages right then. If it failed, she was no worse off. If it worked, she could build something even better. And if they come back? Jack asked. Then we'll be ready, Mary said, her eyes like steel. I'm done being the victim. The telegrams went out. The next day, the answers came in. The Sacramento hotel sent $1,000. A San Francisco restaurant offered $1,500. One by one, her clients bet on her. In 3 days, she had $6,000. But money for a new building didn't solve today's problem. She still had bread to deliver. John found her at the stove at 3 in the morning, looking exhausted. You can't do this alone, Mary, he said. You need to ask for help before you fall apart. He was right, and she hated it. Asking for help always felt like giving up a piece of herself. Realizing she could not win alone, Mary knew she needed help. John said, I know who to ask. That evening, women from all over the area showed up at the ranch. They turned the whole house into a bakery, working in shifts around the clock. Mary saw that this was true community. Emma moved through the chaos like a little general, tasting everything. She proudly told Mary, I am learning to be like you. The words filled Mary's heart. Pushing themselves to their limits, but they made every single order on time. The bread was even better than before, made with care by many hands. The customers took notice. The Sacramento hotel doubled its order. The restaurant in San Francisco wanted to talk about getting more. Word got around, and the newspaper story turned Mary's fight into a tale of grit known across the state. New orders poured in from folks who just wanted to support the baker who survived a fire and kept her word. In 2 weeks, she had more work than she knew what to do with. This is crazy, she told John one night, looking at a stack of telegrams. I went from having nothing to more opportunity than I can handle. So hire more folks, build it bigger, she thought, or build it smarter. She looked at the women who had helped her now sharing a meal in her kitchen. What if instead of one big bakery, we made a cooperative? Many women, many kitchens, all baking to the same high standard. We share the costs, share the profits, and we help each other out. John was quiet for a minute. You would be giving up control. No, I would be sharing the power. There is a difference. She looked him right in the eye. I spent years with one man controlling my every move. I do not want to become that person to others. But if we do this together, everyone has a piece of it. Then you build something that cannot be burned down by one fire or one man's hate, John finished. You are building a community, not just a business. Is that foolish? It is the smartest thing I have heard all week. The cooperative took 3 months to get right. Mary worked with each woman, teaching them what she knew, making sure everything was perfect. They established clear agreements with fair profit sharing and support for anyone who faced trouble. Mrs. Chen started a bakery in her barn. Another woman used a shed. 3 others rented a small place in town. The new stone bakery on John's ranch became their main hub. built to last and handle big orders. And Mary's starter, the one she thought she had lost in the fire, it turned up. One of her helpers had been feeding a small piece of it at her own home just in case. "I remembered what you said," the woman explained, holding out the jar. "About it being 100 years old and from your grandmother. I figured something that survived that long deserved a backup." So the starter went back to work, older and stronger than ever. By summer, the cooperative was making 1,200 loaves a week. The women who had been struggling now had a steady income. But with success came new troubles. The harassment did not stop. Threatening letters arrived at the ranch. Someone poisoned 2 of the dogs. They lived, but the message was sent. Fences were cut. Equipment was damaged. It was wearing everyone down. Emma started having nightmares again. John began sleeping with his rifle next to the bed. Mary felt like she was always looking over her shoulder. "This has to stop," Jack said, after finding another hateful note. Mary took a slow breath. "I have an idea," she said, "but you're not going to like it." The threatening note called them thieves. That word stuck in Mary's mind. She remembered hearing it from Mrs. Green, the woman who had won the baking contest after Thornton interfered. John was doubtful. Helen Green was a grandmother who baked for the church. Mary reminded him that wickedness can wear a friendly face. She knew she had to get proof. Her chance came at the county fair. She walked right up to Mrs. Green's table, praised her rye bread, and asked if she would write down the recipe. Mrs. Green gave a sugary smile and wrote it out on a piece of paper from her notebook. Mary watched every line she drew. The moment she held that recipe, she knew. The handwriting was a perfect match to the threatening notes. Same slant, same letters, everything. She had her proof. That night, she told John and Jack her plan. She was going to confront the woman publicly at the award ceremony. John said it was too risky, but Mary knew it was the only way. She had to expose the truth hiding behind that respectable reputation. The next day, Mary took the stage. She told the crowd that her bakery had been burned and she had received threats. Then she announced that she had evidence of who was responsible. A hush fell over the crowd. Mrs. Green, sitting in the third row, went pale. Mary said she did not want revenge. She just wanted the harassment to stop, explaining there was room for everyone to be successful. Then she held up the threatening notes and the recipe card side by side. She said anyone could see the handwriting matched. She did not say a name, but she made it clear that this was their one and only warning. She walked off the stage in total silence. A moment later, Mrs. Green stood up and rushed out of the fairgrounds. The trouble stopped after that day. Word got around, and about 2 months later, Mrs. Green moved away. Mary never had to say another word. The whole town already knew the truth. Emma finally asked why she did not get the woman arrested. Mary said that sometimes just living a good life is the best revenge. She knew what it felt like to be trapped by bad choices. It was not about forgiveness, but about choosing her own path. She told Emma that being angry at Thomas would have been right, but it would have eaten her alive. So she built something good instead, and that was the real victory. The co-op grew fast. Soon it was 12 women working across 3 different counties. People started to notice their success. A group from California invited her to tell her story. In front of 200 women, she told the whole truth. She said she did not leave because she was brave, but because staying was even scarier. She succeeded because good people helped her believe she was worth it. She said building a life is like making bread. It takes patience. You cannot rush bread, and you cannot rush your own healing. You just have to keep at it and trust that something good will come. Her words spread and letters started coming in from women everywhere. They shared their own hard stories, and Mary wrote back to every single one. It took all the time and energy she had, but she remembered what it was like to feel alone. Helping just one woman made it all worthwhile. Her daughter Emma, 10 years old now, helped with the business. The girl had a real knack for numbers and dreamed of making the business bigger. Mary told her she was going to do amazing things. Emma just said, "You taught me how. You taught me being strong is about being scared but doing it anyway." 2 years after the fire, Mary stood in the bakery at sunset. It smelled like bread and fresh starts. Her friends laughed while they cleaned up. John came to the door with Emma on his shoulders. He asked if she was ready to go home. Home. The word felt warm and real. This ranch was no longer a hiding spot. It was their foundation. Almost ready, she said. She went to feed the sourdough starter, her living link to her past. The bubbly jar was a connection to her grandmother and everything she had overcome. Emma hopped down and came to watch her. She asked, "Will you teach me how to make my own, so I can pass it on someday too?" Mary saw the future plain as day. Emma, grown and strong, passing down their stories of survival. "Yes," she whispered, her heart full. "I will teach you everything." That night on the porch with John, under a blanket of stars, a coyote called out. He asked if she ever regretted coming here. "Never," she said, leaning against him. "The hard parts made me who I am." And who was that? The answer was simple now. "I am a woman who bakes bread, who loves her family and builds instead of breaks. I take up my space and I do not apologize for it." She thought about the long road, the fear and the fire, and how it had all shaped her. She arrived as Mary Whitaker, a woman trying to vanish. Now she was Mary Whitaker, a woman who stood her ground. That change did not come from being perfect. It came because she took a chance, fought for her people, and refused to give up. She learned that surviving was not the point. You had to build a life worth surviving for. The bread had taught her patience. You could not force it. You just had to show up each day, do the work, and have faith in the process. Life was the same way. Healing was, too. You put in the effort, even when results seemed a long way off. If you were stubborn enough, you ended up somewhere better than you ever imagined. Mary Whitaker had refused to be erased. She fought when folks said it was hopeless and built when it seemed impossible. In the end, she created a life that was truly her own, something nobody could ever take away. This land had tested her, and she had tested it right back. That is the truth of survival. It changes you. You can let it make you smaller, or you can use it to grow into the person you were always meant to be. Mary chose to grow, to stand tall in a world that told women to shrink. Sitting there with John's arm around her, Emma sleeping inside, and the bakery solid against the night sky, she smiled. She had arrived with nothing but a suitcase and some sourdough starter. She had built a legacy from bread, community, and a stubborn refusal to be anything less than herself. That was a life worth living, and she was just getting started. On this channel, we bring you stories of the Wild West, stories of cowboys, love, family, sacrifice, and the quiet bonds between people that survive even the harshest frontiers. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe.
Out here on the frontier, where the land is harsh and the nights stretch long and quiet, stories like this aren't just told, they're lived. And what we've witnessed is more than the journey of a woman who ran from her past. It's the slow, stubborn, unbreakable rise of a human spirit that refused to stay buried. Mara didn't arrive at that ranch as a hero. She arrived broken, hunted, and uncertain of her own worth. But piece by piece, loaf by loaf, she rebuilt not just a kitchen, not just a home, but herself. The truth is, this story reminds us that survival is only the beginning. Many people survive pain, survive loss, survive the cruelty of others, but not everyone learns how to live again afterward. Mara did, and she did it in the most honest way possible, through work, through care, through showing up every single day, even when her hands were bleeding and her heart was still afraid. There's something deeply powerful in that kind of quiet persistence. It doesn't look heroic in the moment, but over time, it builds something stronger than any sudden act of courage ever could. Another lesson this story leaves us with is that healing rarely happens alone. Out on that ranch, among dust, grief, and silence, Mara found people who didn't try to control her, didn't try to change her, but simply gave her space to exist. And in return, she gave them something they had lost: warmth, connection, and hope. The little girl who had forgotten how to speak found her voice again. A father who had buried his heart beneath grief learned how to open it once more. And all of it began with something as simple as bread, something made with patience, care, and time. That's the beauty of human connection. It doesn't have to be grand to be life-changing. This story also speaks to the courage it takes to stop running. Because sometimes, the hardest thing isn't escaping what hurts you, it's turning around and facing it when it comes back. Mara could have kept running, she had every reason to, but instead, she chose to stand her ground. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she finally believed she deserved a life worth fighting for. And that's a powerful truth. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision that something else matters more than that fear. There's also a deeper meaning here about identity and self-worth. For so long, Mara was defined by someone else's control, someone else's version of who she was supposed to be. But out on that wild land, she discovered something no one could take from her: her own voice, her own choices, her own value. She didn't become someone new. She became who she had always been, before the world tried to make her smaller. And that's something every one of us can relate to. Somewhere along the way, we all get told to shrink, to stay quiet, to accept less than we deserve. This story reminds us that we don't have to. And maybe the most important lesson of all is that building something meaningful takes time. Just like the bread Mara baked every morning, life doesn't rise instantly. It needs patience. It needs care. It needs faith in a process you can't always see. There will be moments when everything feels lost, when the fire burns down what you've built, when the past catches up, when the future feels uncertain. But if you keep showing up, if you keep putting your hands back into the work, something good can still come from it. Something real, something worth holding on to. In the end, this isn't just a story about the Wild West. It's a story about resilience, about love, about the quiet strength that lives inside ordinary people. It's about finding family where you least expect it, about choosing growth over bitterness, and about refusing, no matter what the world throws at you, to disappear. Because sometimes, the greatest victory isn't winning a fight. It's building a life that no one can take away from you. And maybe, just maybe, that's what this story leaves with you tonight. The reminder that no matter how far you've fallen, no matter how much you've lost, you still have the power to begin again. This literary work is intended purely as fiction. Any similarities to real individuals or events are coincidental and arise solely from the nature of storytelling. The author does not claim accuracy regarding real-world details and does not intend to portray real-life circumstances.